Forward TV. The world is thinking.
It's now my great pleasure to introduce our moderator for panel 2, Dan Geiger, who is the Executive Director of the U.S. Green Building Council Northern California chapter. Mr. Geiger has extensive executive and consulting experience specializing in business and strategic planning, fundraising, nonprofit technology, and internet strategy, and organizational development. And so, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dan Geiger.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting us here. I think we're going to have an extremely interesting panel. Could I ask, are the folks outside, is that the people who are talking? Can we bring it down a little bit, please? So just a couple of opening remarks, and I'm going to do brief introductions of our panel, and we'll go right into the discussion and presentations. You know, I often think that really what we're living in right now is a very critical evolutionary stage for our species and for many forms of life. And it's global in nature, and it's multidimensional. You know, we have global warming, we have an energy crisis, and now we have an extreme economic crisis. And in order to transcend this crisis and build a new economy and a new world, we need a new way of living. And I think green building is like a metaphor for what we need to do as a planet. Because we have to transcend silos. We have to bring in all kinds of smarts and practices and design principles together and work together and share, just as this conference demonstrates, in order to address this problem. So it's a very challenging time, and it's also a very exciting time with huge opportunities. And we have an opportunity to change the way we live, as the people in the previous panel discussed. And I think in order to do that, what we need is leadership. And what we have here is 4 very distinguished leaders in their respective fields who are going to be sharing their experiences and perspective on green building practices in the different dimensions of green building. And that includes the financial aspect, the design, build, construction, operations aspect, as well as emerging technologies. So without further ado, I want to do a brief introduction of our panelists, and then I'm going to ask them, a couple of them have presentations, and a couple of them I'm going to ask to address a couple of questions and issues, and then hopefully we'll have time for some Q&A. Paul Holland is the general partner and coordinates the clean tech practice at Foundation Capital. He primarily focused on early stage startup from $0 to $100 million in revenue, and took a couple of companies public, a lot of technology companies. He's currently on the chair, he's on the board of Serious Materials and several other firms, and he'll be addressing some of the financial issues in terms of our current financial market. Next up will be Dan Winey, who's with the Gensler, and he has a 30-year career in the architecture industry, and including has a very strong passion for the field, international business leadership, and sustainable design in China and other emerging markets. He's a managing principal at Gensler's Pacific Northwest and Asia region. Jeffrey Heller will follow Dan, and he is the president of Heller Manus Architects. He's served as on the California Architects Board, the AIASF, has been president, has worked on various regional councils, including the Bay Bridge East Band Design Advisory Panel member, the ULI Senior Council, on Spurs Advisory Board, an expert in large, complex, urban, mixed-use, and master planning projects in very challenging environments. And wrapping up our panel is Mark Porat, who has a very long, distinguished career in several areas. I'm just going to touch on a couple of highlights. He's really been a pioneer in technology and materials for 25 years, first in the information sector industry and now in energy efficiency. 7 years ago, he moved into clean tech and with a vision to radically reduce energy consumption in the built environment. He serves as a chair of several companies, including Serious Materials. We have a couple of connections here with Serious Materials tonight, By the way, we hosted your party last night. A lot of folks say hi. Without further ado, I want to ask Paul to kick us off. And Paul, I'd like you to address, the financial situation with the global financial crisis, the credit crisis. What kinds of challenges, what impacts on green building and construction, and also what opportunities does this environment present in your view?
Thank you, and thank you for the conference organizers for the chance to come and speak today. I think you see two forces at work in regards to the financial environment around what I would call green infrastructure, just very broadly, green building and related type of technologies. On the one hand, in my industry, in the venture capital industry, we've had an unprecedented outpouring of capital over the course of the last 5 years into relatively early stage startups, whether it be in renewable energy, whether it's in smart materials, whatever it might happen to be. So quite literally tens of billions of dollars have poured into the area, more broadly referred to as clean tech. So I think in many ways that's good news. Now, where the challenge has occurred is in our brethren who are in a related industry, in the private equity industry and the hedge fund industry. As many of you know, unless you've been on Mars for the last 18 months, those industries have collapsed. And in the course of those collapsing, that creates a very difficult problem for a number of these startups. Think of it as, hundreds of seedlings have been planted and they're beginning to grow, and all of a sudden the sun gets blocked out and the water supply goes away. That's more or less what the environment that we're facing with many, many of these startups. The second major force that comes into place is the ARRA, so the U.S. government's intention and, in fact, now action to pour literally hundreds of billions of dollars into the economy in the form of a stimulus. Roughly $137 billion of that stimulus is devoted to projects associated with the Department of Energy. And much of that money needs to be invested, or it goes away, by the end of next year. So we see those two forces coming together, and I think that if I were to summarize it, I would say for the later stages of finance, the government has gone from the financial source of last resort to the financial source of first resort.
Okay. Yeah, let's get you.
I got it.
You got it?
I got it,
Okay,
yeah.
great.
So as an architect, I got to use my PowerPoint crutch here. Do I get your extra 5 minutes that you didn't use? That would be very helpful. Let me hit on this. Hold on a second. And, well, I want to thank everybody. I've had the, if this thing comes up, I've had the privilege of working in Asia since about 1990 when I went over and first opened up our Tokyo office, and then 1993, we had a chance to open up our Hong Kong office. And then in early 2001, we opened up our Shanghai practice. We actually moved it from Hong Kong to Shanghai with the anticipation of growing a practice there fairly quickly. And in the last couple of years, it's grown to 125. So we have 125 people on the ground currently in Shanghai, and we have about 15 in Beijing. And hopefully this year we're going to open up our Singapore office as well. Let's see, close this thing. I hate to restart this. So do I do this or not? Restart now? Or?
Can you get your, don't restart.
Yeah, I don't want to restart it. I'm not, yeah, can we?
Hit the X in the corner.
Yeah, see if it'll.
Yeah, I don't think it won't shut down, Jeff.
I guess they're getting their tech person.
Okay, hold on a second. So let me just talk a little bit. The one thing I want to emphasize to everybody here is that our practice in Asia is very different, I think, than a lot of other international practices. I think most design firms go to Asia with the intent of getting a building or getting a project. Oops, go ahead. Getting a building or getting a project and bringing it back to their respective offices. They go over to Shanghai and they bring a project back to New York or Chicago or San Francisco or whatever, and they do it here. And our practice is very different in the sense that what we're trying to do is to build a practice on the ground in Asia. And that's a very, very different approach. We believe that fundamentally the best quality design work has a deep connection with the culture in a community where the building resides or where the planning is done. And so this is a very different kind of approach. And so our commitment has always been to doing that. The project I'm going to show you today is, and I hate to present a LEED platinum building after the last panelist, but yeah, you know, it is going to be LEED platinum. It is the largest, the second tallest building in the world. It is what we believe signifies our commitment to building a practice in Shanghai. It is a symbol of emerging China, emerging Shanghai, the second tallest building in the world. It's in Lujiazui, in Pudong, in the financial district, just across from Shanghai. We won an international competition. The actual competition took about 4 years. And there were 4 or 5 different competitions, and it came down to ourselves and Norman Foster. And what's sort of interesting about this project is that it was designed by a gentleman named Jun Shaw. And Jun was actually educated at Tongji University, came to the United States for postgraduate work, joined our firm about 15 years ago, and then about 6 years ago went back to help establish our office. We then sent, after we won the competition, we sent 30 design professionals from around the world to Shanghai. And of the 120 staff that we currently have in Shanghai, about 80 are local design professionals. So we have a commitment to train and to educate and to share what we learn in China from our local staff as well as our international staff. The building is the third building in a final tower of what they call a super high-rise trio that was really master planned in the 1990s. The center building, the one that sort of looks like a little bit like a pagoda, very contextual, is Skidmore's building, a beautiful building. The second on the, I guess would be your right, is the Mori building, designed by KPF, and then ours is on the left-hand side. And they really sort of symbolize, in a lot of ways, Shanghai's past, contextual, its present, and hopefully ours, its future. The form of the building is really a combination of art and science. It's a twisting form that was inspired by the bend in the Huangpu River, a coiling dragon. Some say it looks like a coiling dragon, a symbol of Shanghai, and some say that it is emerging from the landscape. And I think it's really all of those things, and those are some of the metaphors that we use. The science part of it is that it's about shape, geometry, and it will be the world's largest double skin building. It's pretty phenomenal. The exterior skin is actually going to be a cable hung structure. It's a combination of office, hotel, residential, convention facilities, entertainment, cultural, ties into mass transportation systems at the base of the building. It is currently that is, 632 meters, 2,075 feet. That's only 300 feet shorter than Mount Tam, to put it in perspective. It gives you a size of the scale of this building. There is 5.4 million square feet, and that is approximately 20% of the North Market entire financial district in one building. The idea is, the concept was a vertical city, a sustainable vertical city, a series of 8 stacked neighborhoods. Each neighborhood's made up of 14 levels. So basically it's 14-story buildings stacked on top of one another. And each one of these podium areas, as you move from stack to stack, is really conceived as a park. And Shanghai, as I think many of you know, is a city of parks. And these parks, each one has a 14-story atrium space, which is going to bring fresh air into the building. And it's going to work like a traditional park, and that's going to be places to eat, entertainment venues, places to rest, and to really try to create a sense of community. It is really difficult to get your arms around a building of this size. What's interesting about this particular building is that this building, unlike Mori's Tower and unlike the Skidmore building, Jinmao Tower, is that this one will be open to the public. And all these public parks will be open. And so it will be basically an open kind of format. It has an intelligent skin. It is, as I said, 2 layers of glass. It's actually 2 curtain wall systems. We actually designed a frit pattern modeled the frit pattern over the entire building. So the frit pattern changes from pane to pane as you move around the entire building. It's designed to minimize heat gain and to maximize daylighting and views. You can imagine with a building of this size, one of the challenges that we really had was trying to model what it's like looking through two curtain wall systems when at some points they're 5 feet away and other points they're 30 to 35 feet away. Visually, what happens, you start to get reflections from the outer curtain wall system to the inner one. Got wind turbines at the top of the building. This is really more symbolic, I think, in a lot of ways. There's enough energy that's going to be created to basically run all the exterior lighting in the building and much of the lighting in the park areas. We're utilizing geothermal energy, geothermal extraction system. The building's HVAC is designed with a tri-generation recapture system and an ice plant. We built an ice plant actually in the basement of the building for daytime cooling. The savings from these systems right now, we're having Guy Battles helping us and COPEX and a number of other sustainable design consultants. It's anticipated to save about anywhere between 3 and 5 million annually. And the energy consumption of the building right now, we're shooting for a reduction of 35% to 40% over a conventional building. Just in terms of water efficiency, we're going to harvest rainwater, recycle gray water. We're looking at black water. And yes, it is housed with low consumption urinals as well. Those are the simple kind of things. At this point in time, we believe the water consumption is going to be reduced by a minimum of 40% over a conventional design. That is 675 million liters annually is what we're looking at right now, or about 245 Olympic-sized swimming pools. I think what's the most interesting is when you have it's actually one cylindrical building with an outer skin that turns. And so the question is, how much did we want it to turn? Part of it was symbolic, but much of it was really driven by what is the most efficient form. And as we started to model the different forms, a couple things happens. As you turn the outer skin, because the outer skin is triangular, it distorts along the edge of the building visually, so it looks like the building is beginning to wave. So that was a consideration. We went through the whole process of wind tunnel testing. And when we did the testing, what we realized is that we could reorient the building in a different direction, actually move it around slightly, and we twisted the building to, I guess it was about 120 degrees. And currently at this point, and we just finished the structural work, we just added a couple of additional belt trusses on the building, but right now the structure is going to use 32 to 35% less materials than a conventional tower, and that's primarily concrete and steel. So it's a huge savings, because the primary loads, what you're dealing with in a tower of this size, are wind loads. That's really the biggest issue that you have to deal with. So I have a little, would you guys like to see a little video here? Do we have time for a video? Okay, hold on a second. I'm going to play this thing for you. This was produced by the staff in Shanghai. Oops, let's get out of that. If I can find it here. Now, if I double-click on this, oh, that's not what I want. Well, maybe we can play it. Pardon me? Oh, he put it on the other computer? Well, that's no good. Yeah, okay, that would be great. But I guess the bottom line from my perspective is that, it's really nice to talk about sustainable buildings and such. And, I think there's extraordinary opportunities. But I think the bigger opportunities in China are related to master planning and urban design. There is so much that could be done in terms of designing sustainable communities, and we really push sustainability in a hard way. And we've got 3 or 4 lead projects over there, and we set LEED Gold as our criteria for every single project, regardless of whether the client wants it or not. But this issue of master planning and urban planning and respecting ancient waterways and pathways and the quality of the soil and that kind of thing is something that one of my partners, Michelle St. Pierre, is here. It's something that we deal with all the time, and I think that's where the real opportunities exist in China. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Regarding my previous remarks about what we need in terms of our current global situation, I would add to leadership as inspiration. And I think the design that we saw and that we will see is an amazing example of what can be done when people are inspired to do great things. And it's also struck me that green building is not just about buildings. It's about people, it's about how we live, it's about many other things beyond energy consumption. And so I think that was a beautiful example, and the best green buildings that I've ever seen encompass all of that. And just parenthetically, LEED, I think, while it's a standard and it's also designed to drive the market, I personally, as part of USGBC, believe that's just the beginning. And this is a great example. And Jeff Heller is now going to come and tell us about some projects in Guangzhou and other green building projects.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey Heller. Dan actually kind of put his finger on where my talk's going to go. I'm going to start with a project in Shanghai, but then I'm going to segue to what we're doing in Guangzhou, which is a master plan of the downtown. And I agree that doing the buildings right is an important piece, and doing the bigger vision of the master planning and the buildings within that and the policies within that is the place to have one of the most powerful effects. But I would also say that it struck me watching the panel that came before us, which was very heavily into policy and theory, that it would be, I think, terrific in some of these to have more of an interaction between the policy theory and the practitioners of us at the same time, because I think, especially when you see the Guangzhou piece, you can get a little flavor of how that can really echo and reinforce each thing. So to begin with, this is a project we're doing in Shanghai, and it's across the river from Dan's project, and it's a smaller scale project, but it's an interesting one. It's right on the it's near the Yangpu district, and it's in an area that faces to the river right over here, and it's part of a new development which is also near the cruise terminal area, which is recently developed. And the most interesting thing that struck me when I first saw the site, which is over here, is the commanding view of both the Bund and the Pudong, and that started to drive the design idea for our building. And so the building, which is here, has a strong presence on the river, and again, it's more in scale with the rest of the area in Shanghai. And the way we approach the design in terms of sustainability is that the building takes advantage of that commanding view, but each orientation of the building is carefully designed so that it also is working in a passive way to minimize the amount of heat effect on the building, and so that our energy consumption is driven to a very low point. So when you start and you look to the southwest and the view out of the building towards the river, you're looking at a more southerly and southwesterly view, and we've incorporated in that major facade horizontal shading elements which will keep the glass strongly shaded. And as you move around the building, the part to the west becomes more solid so that there's more of a chance for insulation and less glass area. And then as you move around to the main entry on the north and then on the east, the glass is more open, again, because the sun isn't impacting it so much. So we can work in balanced daylighting and passive solar control, and then do all of the other things. So it's very easily achieving a LEED Gold and projects under construction. The big idea, though, and I think the stronger issue for this panel is what we're doing down in Guangzhou. And in Guangzhou, we've been asked to redesign a major part of the downtown. And you go to Guangzhou, and what you see is a city that's completely cut up by its roadways. And people either have to go over the roadways or under the roadways. It's car-dominated. They've created artificial barriers where they didn't have real physical barriers. It creates a situation if you want to go by on the surface, you know, it separates communities, and this is what people do all the time, dodging cars. This was one of my favorites, going through a road ramp. And if you're not going to do that, you're going to go on the bridges over, or you're going to go on a tunnel, which is a very unpleasant experience under. And so we were brought into Guangzhou to kind of look at the place holistically in the new Eastern Axis area. And it's a very interesting part. There's the Zhujiang New Town in this area. There's some existing buildings here. The sports center where the Asia Games are going to be is here. The city tower is here, and then beyond it, the railway station. And so what we've been working on with the city of Guangzhou, directly with the mayor and the planning department, is an area about 6 kilometers long. And the idea is to take this and set an example of tying the city back together. And the tying of the city back together creates a whole series of sustainable policies, get people out of their cars, and look at the buildings and the planning in a holistic way to make for a more major statement about sustainability. So, you know, the plan goes from the mountain here, Yanling Park, to the river, and across the river is the new 1,600-meter TV tower, which presently is the tallest structure in Asia, and Dan will be dealing with that with his building. But quite a dramatic, a very well done building. This was a design competition Arup won. So in terms of the fundamental principles, where we got to was we've restated the way that communities should evolve in China and elsewhere in the world. And we talk about reconnecting to nature. And the symbol for that for us is going from the mountain to the river and using water as the connector. The second fundamental principle is this is a city that's hemmed in by roadways where the car has dominated. And we want people to dominate over cars and create throughways and get people back in control of their environment. And in addition, to use more public transit. The third is to really focus on the heat island effect. It's not talked about that much, but cities generate heat by the very virtue of the impenetrable pavement and concrete that the buildings make. And cities like Bangkok and Guangzhou and other cities in these belts actually, and Shenzhen, actually raise the temperature of the cities because they do not deal with permeability in a good way. Of course, we also deal with the other issues of transit, general energy consumption, and water. So our plan is really 3 plans. The first plan is the Asian sports city, because we got to deal with the Asian Games. The second is the eco city, coming back to nature. And the third is the livable city, and the livable city is the reconnection of the city to itself, instead of being divided up, and then people can't go anywhere, and then they jump in a car. And then they sit in traffic, so really bad traffic there. And the way we affect these things is through a series of nodes, major nodes, that will reconnect the city for pedestrians. So first is from Yanling Park looking south. You cannot get from the north part of the city to the rest of the city very easily, if at all, because there's a major highway, there's railroad tracks, and the only thing they have now is a tunnel, and there's somebody there that charges a fee if you want to walk through the tunnel. So the first piece is to create a major pedestrian connection from north to south of the city, a footbridge which really serves as a linking element as well as something which is kind of a symbol of the entry into Guangzhou, and it's been done worldwide very beautifully many times. So we've created a linking plan that takes you from the park and the communities on the north side to the railway station, which is the building in the foreground. The second piece is the railway station itself. You come to Guangzhou on the train, you get out, and you come into this dark pit here, which is completely jammed with cars and buses. And the reason for that experience is that somebody decided to put a plaza on the top of the entry. And the plaza is one of these great heat sinks. Talk about heat island. And the only people on the plaza are the maintenance people and the city planners I went there with. Okay? And there's about 500 acres of stuff. I mean, not really, but close. And this is the experience. You come out of the train or out of the car, this is what you get. So we completely redesigned this. We're tearing it all off and creating an entry which is a real entry to the city and is glass with built-in photovoltaics. Somebody was talking about photovoltaics and the expense or not. Well, this is a place where you do photovoltaics in a big way because you need the shading. This place is hot. So the photovoltaics not only going to generate a significant amount of energy, but they will create shading as well. And we get rid of the heat island, and we go to a more ventilated situation. And then we recognize the shading of trees, and so the whole plan coming down through takes water and trees till we get to the sports center, where we redo the sports center in the same way. We change this kind of thing using pedestrian crossings to a greener, more open place. And probably the heart of it, and I'll move this along as quickly as I can, probably the heart of it is here. This is a BRT station, Bus Rapid Transit, which is being introduced into Guangzhou. This is Tianha Road today. It's a complete barrier. Our plan is to drop that road so that people walk at grade over it, clear up a whole series of traffic issues, and create a BRT station, which is really a very strong element which will encourage people to use it, and links, by the way, not only to the sports center, but to some major shopping. And right now, this is the new Expo in Shanghai. This is an example of kind of construction which can be done well and quickly in China, and would be the kind of thing that we do. Just quickly, again, going through it, the city was going to tear out a big chunk of the existing neighborhood, and what we went back and said is don't tear any of it out and just redesign it and create a major pedestrian way which is retail integrated into the community. So we've put preservation as a part of this. And then further connections, a bridge which replaces a tunnel. Again, this is a road that couldn't be lowered, but a very elegant, light bridge. And other connections into town until we get to the island, which we use an integrated amphitheater into, and then tie from the river all the way back to the mountain. So there you go.
I love architects, I gotta say. It's like, what an amazing profession. If I'm reborn, I want to come back to be able to do this kind of work. This beauty, design, living, all combined into this amazing thing. Thank you so much. Our cleanup batter is Mark Poret, who is going to address issues around net zero, energy efficiency, latest trends, and kind of give us a closing thing and leave a little time for us to do Q&A.
You bet. Well, that was breathtaking. I'm just stunned by how pretty that was. We're going to talk about a vision of the built environment and drive it really hard, all the way to net zero, because the built environment, as you'll soon see, stands as one of the largest consumer of energy and possibly, as Mark Levine has already said, possibly one of the low-hanging fruit, one of the real happy stories of what we can all do together. The built environment is about the same everywhere these days. What these chaps are doing is being done everywhere. The built environment is exploding. These are large buildings. What you don't see is where people actually live. Lots and lots and lots of housing and small-scale commercial and so on. And the built environment stands there in the United States as the 51% consumer of all the energy that we produce in the United States, half the energy. And even more of CO2 is responsible, the built environment is responsible for 55%. So there's no way we're going to solve energy issues, climate issues, and the thing that's foremost on everyone's mind now, which is jobs and economic recovery, without really taking a very hard look at the built environment, see what we can do with it. That 51% means that everything else, transportation and the rest of manufacturing, is the other 49%, and there's a little tiny piece for agriculture. So it's really the big one to focus on. Break that down. You may know these numbers. About 39% of total U.S. energy is used to operate buildings. That's cooling, heating, lighting, appliances, things of that sort. On top of that, there's another 12% of total U.S. energy that is the energy embodied inside the materials that go into the buildings that these chaps then design in. And that's cement, steel, glass, drywall, bricks, more or less in that order. And so there's where the half comes from, and you see the breakdown between residential and commercial. A lot of it is residential. Let's not forget that. The problem is well understood and well documented. We know where energy is being used, and we know, therefore, where to get rid of it if you're talking about it at building scale. We'll soon talk about it at mass scale. Now let's take a look at this country. These data are amazing. You probably know them. The new urban environment, that is people who want to move into urban environments in China, 350 million people, housing and shops and schools and stores and police stations and everything else, coupled with the Minister of Construction desire and NDRC's desire not to encourage urban migration, means another infrastructure and another set of housing and schools, et cetera, for 250 million people in the countryside. That's the scale. Let me give you a sense of that scale in square feet. The United States today has 300 billion square feet. By the year 2030, 300 billion. By the year 2030, we'll move to about 400 billion square feet. China is probably going to build 400 to 500 billion square feet new in the next 20 years here in both urban and countryside. So China is going to build approximately 2 United States, one to 2 United States in the next 20 years. Now, buildings in China are traditional. They're pretty sustainable. They don't have heaters, air conditioners, lighting or appliances or elevators. Nonetheless, China buildings, the built environment, consumes this much, 37%. Industry, because we and the rest of the world has outsourced to China the manufacturing and making of things, is outsized compared to ours. Ours is only about 29% or 27%. China's 50%. Transport is tiny, although I fear that with the encouragement of cars in China, first of all, urban design that encourages cars, something we just heard is a really bad idea, and secondly, the development of very inexpensive cars, this 9% will grow. In fact, these numbers will probably become more like the United States. And by reminder, the United States is 51%, 29, 20, 20, and 21, something of that sort. Okay? So let's take a look at China. 37% total energy, outsized in terms of climate change and greenhouse gases, because most of China, as you well know, is driven by coal. And so that explains that. And here's how the breakdown manifests itself. 23% in operations, again, mostly residential, not commercial, and another 14%, actually more than the United States, in buildings and infrastructure, and that goes for, again, cement, steel, glass, and things of that related to that. Let's talk about China. These data are preliminary. They're courtesy of work that I did with Mark Levine and some of his team. They're subject to change, but they tell a story that directionally is very, very important and quite dangerous. So if you want to pay attention, this is the time to do it. Danger. Right now, the demand curve in China for energy, which you see is flat, which means we've given China full credit for the 5-year 20% efficiency across all industry goal. We've given China full credit for efficiency. Nonetheless, the energy demand curve, business as usual, goes like that. What's not well discussed or well understood or well known is that coal, which drives China, is undergoing what we call a peak coal experience, meaning that by the year 2030, plus or minus 3 years or so, or maybe a little bit more, the amount of coal that China has, minus what it uses, plus what it discovers, will peak. We've just been through peak oil. We know what happens to price volatility in that environment. Now let's lay on top of this, and by the way, the next data are preliminary, let's lay on top of it all other forms of supply. So we're going to compare supply and demand. Here they are. Oil, natural gas, all the fossils, oil, natural gas, the nuclear, which is a big emphasis in China, as you know, and then all of the renewables, wind, solar, biomass, et cetera, and hydro, et cetera. And you notice that the total supply, even though it's expanding rapidly, still leaves a substantial deficit in China. An energy-driven deficit means it's an energy-driven recession. The fundamental contract that the government has in China, as we all understand it, is that we supply continued economic well-being on a per capita basis, and the people give us their loyalty and their obedience, more or less. I apologize for abstracting that so much. But that's the idea. The idea is our job as government is to provide increased well-being, and we're not going to be able to do it with an energy-driven recession. And that's a recession. And that recession will come if we don't solve the problem. Question, how do you solve it? You either increase the supply of energy, and some of us, theorists, think, and practitioners think, that it's going to be very hard to exceed these numbers. It's going to be very hard to create more supply. The obvious other place to look is to reduce the demand. And one has to reduce the demand in the three major sectors of the built environment, manufacturing, and by manufacturing, we mean both the style of manufacturing, how we manufacture, the processes, the technical processes, and also the mix of what it is we're manufacturing and exporting, and transportation. If we hit net zero energy, a very difficult goal for any country, including China, although China is reasonably well equipped to begin prosecuting standards. If we hit that, we might be able to decrease the deficit and the energy-driven recession that we see coming for China by maybe 30, 40, or maybe as much as 45%. A big deal, a very big deal. And that's what we have in mind for China, and that's why we're promoting net zero. Current course and speed, danger path. The way the built environment is coming together, the tremendous explosion of residential and commercial, urban and countryside, spells danger. Those buildings will substantially, unless they're Gensler buildings or unless they're Heller buildings, or will substantially look like Western buildings. They will eat China out of house and home. A big danger. The other path is obviously the one we're discussing at this conference, and what we all hope we focus on really intently in the coming years. China Green is a dream. There are various examples. Some are successful, some are less successful, some are just talking, some are actually being built. And there's great reason to think that there can be China-US cooperation. Let me surprise you and say that China, for its own purposes and its own requirements, is developing and will continue to develop a clean tech industry, and a lot of that will be focused on the built environment because it has to be. We might be the ones that are recipients of Chinese technology and Chinese practices and Chinese methods. It's not a one-way street at all. China has the scale, we don't. That's already been mentioned today. So expect to see a China-USA corporation, which is very much a two-way street, maybe a lot of it coming from China. And what's necessary to make China Green happen? Let's develop net zero energy goals for the new built environment for China, for sure. Going backwards and retrofitting the existing one probably doesn't make sense. But for the new built environment in China, let's promulgate and make sure that we prosecute at the national, provincial, and municipal levels net zero energy standards, goals, and policies, put resources into compliance, help with that. By the way, some of these buildings should be self-reporting to make compliance easy. Definitely allow the market price of energy to reflect its cost. We are working hard globally to try and put a limit on carbon so that it more accurately reflects its true cost. The fourth, there is a big stimulus package of $586 billion that is going in part into energy efficiency at the rate of $12 million an hour in China. An hour, which is good news. And then obviously support the upcoming round of negotiations and into the future on climate change. That would be our view of what's necessary. Now, very quickly, in the remaining 2 minutes if I have, okay, very, very quickly. In the built environment, the good news is everything can and should be reinvented. You're familiar possibly with the McKinsey study, which takes a look at this very question. And if you look at the lower left-hand corner, you notice that most of the goodness is in the built environment. Look at this list of things. And with that idea, we've created several companies. Paul is board member of one, Cirrus Materials. He was just in the White House. We have another one, CalStar. Data point. All passenger automobiles in the world, of which there are 700 million, emit 2.8 billion tons of CO2. Same for cement. It's the same number. Think of how much effort is going into biofuels and so on. China is about cement. We have to reduce it, and so we're going to market with some products this year. Zeta communities, affordable housing, and net zero. This is a model that China will replicate. It will take over. There's no question in my mind that China will begin to do this. Low-scale housing, low-density housing, and also tall buildings that first reduce the demand by 70%, and then whatever's left over, we add some other techniques and technologies. First reduce the demand, then top it off. And they're being built as we speak in a factory in San Leandro. Thank you.
Well, I think we get the picture now. That was really great, Mark. Thank you. Obviously, there's huge challenges here and tremendous innovation and much more clarity coming about what we need to do to address the changes that we're experiencing in the world and the crises. So a couple of you have talked in their previous panel, spoke about regulations, and also one of the questions earlier was about...
Could you use that for a second?
Oh, sure.
Turn up the green one.
Hello? This is mine.
It will be.
Okay. Hello, hello. Hello, hello.
Push
Hello.
the green fader.
I think we're not doing it anymore. Hello. Hello. Okay, great. So one of the questions and comments earlier was in regard to the role of regulations, and Mark spoke to that. And also, often I'm asked about what does it cost to do green building? What's the extra cost? And I typically like to flip that question and say, what does it cost not to do green building? And how do we think of costs as an investments? And I'd like to hear from perhaps Dan and Jeff about your experience in terms of the financial and the market impact. Like why is the market embracing this, even if there were no regulations? And can you talk about some of the issues in that regard?
Yeah, sure. I think that if you look back probably 3 or 4 years when really I think the whole sustainable design movement really sort of solidified. I used to see all these charts that it was 15% more for a platinum building and 12% more for this and that. And I don't believe any of it, quite frankly. I do think that you do pay a slight premium, but I think if you look at the return on investment is clearly there. It's really about really planning and doing the design in a smart way up front. And that's probably one of the issues that we struggle with most in China right now, is that the pace of the work that's being done is done so quickly. Like the Shanghai Tower project, the design competition was 4 years. We ended up winning the project in June and they broke ground in November. Right? That would never happen in the United States. It would take 2.5 to 3 years before you broke ground. So it's just being more thoughtful. And I think the other part of it is that what we found is that as much as we know about sustainable design and systems and engineering, the way that you really have to get things moving forward is that you have to bring the best minds in the world together. And we've been fortunate that we've been able to do that in China. And I think the other thing is that certainly the scalability of the projects is such a large scale that you can try some things there that you wouldn't necessarily try in the United States, but you can bring those practices back to the U.S.
Yeah, thank you. Jeff, do you want to?
Yeah, I agree with what Dan said. Our experience is the same. I'll just give you a couple of data points. Probably 3, 4, 5 years ago, to do a LEED certified building would be like a 5% cost. To do silver might be 10%, so on and so forth. Today, in an urban infill situation, because of what developers and contractors know and what we know as designers, to do LEED certified, LEED silver building is zero cost. You can get it done pretty much with your eyes closed. In fact, another good data point is we recently worked on 555 mission for Tishman Spire, which opened a few months ago, and the building was designed in the year 2000. In 2005, construction was started. The leasing people at Tishman at that time said, we have to do a green building in order to lease the building properly to the tenants because they're all demanding it. And we converted the building from no rating to LEED Gold during construction at a very minimal cost. And it had mostly to do with policy, energy management, construction management, and so on. So we went from zero to LEED Gold during construction, not a lot of cost. And I think that over time it's still changing, and to achieve LEED Platinum even will not be that significant in terms of cost. In fact, Dan and I are collaborated right now on a project that we're trying to get pitched to a government agency, and the building will become a LEED Platinum building here in the city, and we've already priced it, worked it out, and we're headed toward LEED Platinum, again, without a lot of heavy breathing. So I think we're on our way to that and carbon neutral.
Great, thank you.
I guess I had one other observation, and that observation is that LEED isn't good enough. I think we got to really crank it up a lot. And I look at, I get a chance to travel all around the world. And, I see the situation in China as sort of looking one way. And then I go to India and I see something completely different. And I see the lack of resources, the difficulty they have with sanitary facilities and energy and everything else. And they're dealing with so much less than we have right now. And they're even tightening it up. And I think that we just need to raise the bar. We need to continually raise the bar.
Yeah. Thank you. I agree with you on that. And I just want to point out, I know a recent study by McGraw-Hill found that LEED green buildings save operating costs 13.8%, which, if you think about it, even strictly from a financial point of view, not a bad investment, doing a little bit better than the stock market the last 6-10 months. And speaking of the stock market, I want to ask Paul and Mark about what are your thoughts on the current major financial and credit crisis having on, the green building and investments in clean and green tech and everything we've been talking about? What sort of implications do you think this has for us?
Yeah, I think we spent a little bit of time on that at the beginning in terms of thinking about the notion of sort of replacing the later stage finance, which I think is really a critical part of the issue. There are some more fundamental things that are going on now. Our industry association, National Venture Capital Association, is trying to attack what is a major problem for our world, which is the way I describe it to people is that it's, every system is kind of like a plumbing system. Things have to go in and things have to go out. And in our world, right now, what's happening is a lot of stuff's going in. There's stimulus money, there's research money, there's other things that are happening, but there's very, very little that's going out because for various reasons, we've really screwed up our outgoing financial system, our IPOs, our exits, other things like that. So that's the place where if I could wave a magic wand right now, I would go and do that. That's going to benefit all of us to some extent because we all watch our portfolios, we watch what's going on. And we're in the least healthy state in that regard for perhaps the last 25 years, at least in this country. And just to give you a statistic that should bother you if you're an American is that in 1996, 60% of the IPOs in the world took place in New York. In 2006, the last date that really mattered, because there were a lot of IPOs that year, 22% of the IPOs took place in New York. So we're handing over our financial services institution to other parts of the world, and it's a shame. It's kind of happening right under our eyes, and we need to figure out a way to do something about it.
Yeah, I'd say that where we intersect with your question is the notion that Washington is now where the action is, and Washington is concerned about jobs. That's its number one concern. And as we all know, we were led into this recession by a couple of sectors, but certainly construction and the built environment was a leader. It collapsed right away. So we're now in a sort of on our back state. The industry's on its back. And the question is how, when we come out of it, in the course of the next 2 to 5 years, are we going to come out of it as business as usual, designing and building houses, multifamily, commercial, public buildings the way we have in the past? Or is this the time to make a discontinuous change, a break with the past, and say, okay, in terms of jobs, in terms of energy and climate change, it's a three-for-one combining of those vectors to let's transform the built environment. And that takes two forms. Form number one is all buildings that are new. And those should clearly be, that should be a transformation in the built environment. Looking to leadership here to say it can be done, it should be done, we will do it. And that's looking forward. And Zeta is an expression of that. And then looking back at the existing stock where that 39% lives, there are billions of dollars being devoted to transform the existing built environment. Obama's plan is 1 million homes transformed per year. That's not good enough, because that means it's a 126-year cycle, and that's outside the political cycle for sure. So we might have to actually go somewhere like 5 million or 6 million or 8 million homes a year transformed, and also small business. And those to me are the two big investment opportunities that I see on the horizon.
Thank you. Yes, well, here we go. We're going to break for lunch in a few minutes. So I think we have time for one question from the audience, and I would ask that you keep it brief so that we're able to grab a bite shortly. Do we have a question from the floor? I didn't see who that was, but stand up and please, if you could speak loudly.
Hi, my name is Sam Mehta, and I do sense the discussion that just recently has taken place, some inclination towards less consumption. And to me, the sustainable growth is the oxymoron. If you talk about growing no matter what and try to be sustainable, it's, at least for the developed part of the world, it doesn't make a sense. So what I want to know is that any of your development plan, or are you talking about reducing the growth or going to the negative part and sharing the wealth?
That's an excellent question. The role of growth. Is there such thing as sustainable growth? I think it's important.
Getting back to what we're doing in Guangzhou, and I think Dan touched on it a little bit too, is that in the urban planning and policy realm, there is an enormous opportunity to reduce energy consumption, CO2 and all that, just through good planning and reversing what has happened dramatically. And that in that process, the introduction of good new buildings and broad, good urban planning policy, the net effect will be to diminish the impacts on the globe. And so often when I'm talking about these things, I'm talking about saving the world. And in fact, when I talked to the mayor of Guangzhou and presented this recently and had this plan approved, I said, our job is to save the world. And he and they agree.
Yeah, I think I'd answer it in a couple of different ways. One, on a more personal basis, my wife and I are attempting to build a very aggressively green house. It's the highest lead point house in the country right now in terms of design. It's down in Portola Valley. In the course of doing that, we're employing, 100 people, right? I mean, we've got artisans, we've got designers, we've got construction people, and so forth. So it's a net energy negative house. We create more energy than we use. We recycle all of the water. We do a whole bunch of other things. And yet, it's part of, what could be growth in society. So as we think of what we're going to see happening, what I hope to see happening over the coming decades, is we'll simply redefine growth as being growth that's also green. And there's really no inherent barrier to that. And in the venture industry, the way we think about the clean tech business, it's really the next trillion-dollar business. We're talking mostly the built environment on this stage, but we have another company called Silver Spring that's partnered with PG&E and others. They're transforming all the currently dumb meters in the world to smart meters. They're the leading company involved in doing that. They'll do 10 million of those for PG&E. They'll do 6 million of those for Florida Power and Light. There are 150 million meters in the world, and I'm sorry, I will correct myself. There's 1.5 billion meters in the world, and the transformation of what's going to happen in the utility industry, which is one of the largest industries in the world, is going to create tremendous growth opportunities, and all those installations lead to sustainability. So I disagree with the tenet that growth and sustainability are oxymorons. I actually think it's just simply, we have to just think about it differently, and we have to become green and grow.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. We're going to need to wrap up, but let's acknowledge this amazing panel for their sharing. And I want to just close for 1 second. I want to close with, you know, Jeff said something that really moved me, is that our job is to save the world. And frankly, we kind of say that around our office a lot. And I just want to share the U.S. Green Building Council has a vision for what we want to do as an organization, which is far beyond LEED. It doesn't have the word LEED in it. And I just want to quickly share it I think it's a shared vision that we all have. And it's that buildings and communities will regenerate and sustain the health and vitality of all life within a generation. So I invite you to join our vision and make this happen here, China, India, Europe, Africa, South America, everywhere. As Jeff said, that's our job right now. So thank you all very much.